Hey guys, I'm here today with none other than Mr. Ron Lynch. He is one of the guys who is a legend in the marketing space, specifically in video marketing for household name companies like GoPro and others. He's taken GoPro, one of the people who helped take GoPro from 600K when they're still a very young company to 600 million, and he's just an incredible guy all around. So super excited for this interview. I hope you guys enjoy it as much as I enjoy speaking to him today.
Well, thank you for that, Billy, and I appreciate that. I'm glad to be here. I hope that we find something useful for your folks.
I think we will, my friend. So where are you at the moment? Tell me where in the world you are and what is it you're currently doing?
So physically, I'm in Austin, Texas today, where it is January 2nd, and it is miserably raining and 37 degrees Celsius. Fahrenheit. So it's on the cusp of being frozen here for one day, and raining cats and dogs. I'm in my home office, and business-wise, I have a number of businesses that I run. One is a coaching business. One is primarily a consumer goods company. So I'm a partner in a company called Bonfire, which is affiliated with Guthrie Ranker. And we look for products that are innovative, that have some market, but are probably underfunded and lack the specific skill sets that we have as marketers. So real true innovation companies, and those can be in any field. We don't have a restriction on what industry they're in. The parent company focuses primarily in healthcare and skincare businesses. We do not. We take a look at everything. And then I have an agency business where I help people like GoPro and Samsung and Johnson & Johnson and my other clients take innovative products and launch them into the marketplace and hopefully grow market share and change people's lives.
That's pretty cool. What I want to do, I find useful is just going back to where it all started. Tell me a little bit about your journey growing up and what kind of pivotal events led you down this path, if you don't mind.
Sure. I think I was always a creative kid. I grew up in Seattle, Washington, and I was a fanatical football fan as a child, and we didn't have a football team. So I had to like the Minnesota Vikings, who were my grandparents' home team, where my mom was in Minneapolis. And we got the Seattle Seahawks when I was 10 years old. And I had this crazy idea that they needed a mascot. So my parents had a small publishing company, and they bought into this idea, and our family created the first Seattle Seahawks, Salty Seahawk mascot for the Seattle Seahawks with my 10-year-old idea. And so I got to spend a couple of summers wearing a bird suit, going around town and going to parades and going to football games and all kinds of things, meeting people. And it really was a marketing play. It was marketing my parents' publishing company, and so it was an idea of marketing. And then I did every odd job a person could do between the ages of 15 and 20, from working for a plumber to working in a grocery store to working in a restaurant as a short order cook. So I learned how to do pretty much everything. I always had a love for food, and inside our grocery stores, we had a cooking kiosk where we taught people how to cook. And so I learned how to sell products via that kiosk, whether they be cooking products or cooking appliances. And in that same time period, between 15 and 20, I ended up, there were a lot of movies being made in Seattle, and I lucked out and got a role in a movie and got a SAG card and became an actor part-time. So I spent a lot of times on movie sets, learning how to make films, and I stayed on his crew often. So I had an understanding of the filmmaking process, and out of that grew an executional process of learning how to write and learning how to write screenplays. So my career went on, and I was a part-time screenwriter, and I was a full-time grocery store manager and learning retail. And when I was about 32 years old, the opportunity came along to leave the grocery business and start working in the infomercial field. It was kind of a cross between selling at that kiosk and screenwriting and film directing. So I started making a lot of cooking infomercials for things like the Ultimate Chopper and Miracle Blade knives, and lots of cooking appliances, cookware, smartware, all kinds of stuff. So it was kind of a natural segue in my early 30s into this industry, which now I've been doing it for 20 years. Thoroughly have enjoyed it, and have had the opportunity to launch 300 products and work with 70 different brands, and fail about 60% of the time, or 50% of the time, which is useful because you learn a lot in those failings as well. And now we're batting records. Average is a lot better because we pick better. So we succeed about 80% of the time instead of failing 80% of the time now, which is great.
Not bad at all.
And that's cultivated into an internet marketing business as well. It's taking those same principles in television and applying them now online to do a lot of online work.
See, that's interesting. I'll come back to that, but
sure.
What's your definition of failure in this context?
What's my definition of what?
Of failure in this context.
Failure is, to me, is having somebody invest a lot of money in a product and a marketing program and not having it catch with the public. And that happens. There's a lot of good ideas that are either not represented correctly, or there's a lot of bad ideas that people put money behind that they should never put money behind.
Yep.
But their ego's involved with it because they've created it. So that happens as well.
You're able to recognize that a lot better now to tell people you shouldn't pursue this?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. We say no to about 80% of the stuff we see easily, maybe 90%. And we have a line of metrics that we involve ourselves with that tell us whether we should involve something. And one of those is audience. If there's not an audience for the product and it doesn't serve an innovative purpose for that audience, then I'm not going to get involved in it.
Okay, that's cool. So when did the large kind of companies come about? Rephrase that. When did the things come about that you'd say have made your career, have been your defining kind of keystone clients?
Well, it's funny because the companies get made out of what we do. It's not. It was very, probably 10 or 15 years into my career when large companies started coming to us to launch innovations. But even when that happens, we typically get things that are underfunded inside of those companies, where someone says, hey, we've got an idea for a product. We don't know whether it'll work. Let's try this methodology because it's a rather less expensive approach to market than big brands are used to. There's a lot of brands that used to dumping $50 to $100 million into media to launch, say, a phone. But that same company may have, like we had Microsoft come to us once with a small product. It was called a photo viewer. This is back in the day before everybody had an iPhone with a photo, a camera in their pocket. And it was a way of getting cameras taking pictures and having them get onto your computer and manipulate them. And Microsoft didn't want to invest Microsoft money into that. And they said, hey, well, let's do an infomercial and see if it works. And if it works, then we'll go deeper. And they happened to do that about a year before the iPhone. So by the time it was ready to market, even though it did work, it failed because the technology had moved on. So
that's interesting.
Early on, some things that I either witnessed in the agency that I worked with or had some involvement in included things like OxyClean, where OxyClean was a product that was at the fair. And it was not a huge household name. The Sonicare toothbrush was brought to my former agency, and the same guy who brought that, David Giuliani, later brought the Clarisonic skincare brush. So they weren't big brand names when they came to us, but when they left, they became big brand names and were, in the case of Sonicare, sold to Philips, and in the case of Clarisonic skincare was sold to L'Oreal for substantial, $500 million type checks, and OxyClean was sold for, I think, $327 million to Church & Dwight. But again, with the day they came in the store, in our store, they didn't exist. So I've had the opportunity to watch a lot of things grow, which has been very nice.
Now, you mentioned you have the certain metrics for what you'll accept in terms of clients you'll take on. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. And really, they're the four things that anybody should look at if they're going to start any type of business. And the first one is innovation. Are you providing a solution to a problem that's new and innovative, that has some USP around it, some unique sales proposition, and has hopefully some sort of proprietary nature to it? Does it have a patent? Does it have Is it protectable? And will there be future iterations of it that'll carry on the innovation? The iPhone's a good example. You know, I think we're on iPhone X now, right? Which is about the 10th one. And so will you have iterations in the future of your product that can be, you know, created in perpetuity? So innovation is critical. What problem does it actually solve? Which provides you with an audience. If you have a product that's solving a problem for somebody, you probably have an audience. So having an audience for your product is critical. We used to be in a position, because we were exclusively buying television, looking for audiences that were 80% of mass. So you really needed a huge audience. So that provided things like OxyClean and toothbrushes, like everybody washes their clothes and everybody brushes their teeth and that sort of thing. So those were kind of easy to say yes to in those days. But now, thankfully, to the internet, you can look at segments and go, hey, this doesn't necessarily have to go to television to be a success. So do I have a viable audience that I can reach digitally is useful now. And you couldn't do that 15 years ago, but now you can definitely do that. So I will say yes to products if I have a very specific target and bullseye around an audience that I know I can reach, and it's innovative. So innovation, audience. Then the next step is margin. In order to have a business successful, you have to pay for the cost of goods, you have to pay for the marketing, you have to pay for the staff, you have to pay for these things along the way to grow a company. And the most expensive thing is the marketing dollars. Do you have the marketing dollars to fuel and get your message out and recycle those dollars? If you have a product that you can sell more than once, for instance, a consumable like bulletproof coffee, that's good, because you've got a customer that perhaps you can hook and you can get them into a cycle and they repurchase and repurchase. If you have a one-off product, like Fitbit is a challenging product. They've done a great job with it, but if you can imagine trying to sell a product that you probably only going to purchase one time or one time every 2 or 3 years, you'd have to have some manufactured obsolescence in the product, which most consumer goods have, whether we like it or not. Our refrigerators are designed to break after 7 years, not to last forever. So do you have the margin in that? Does it? And I look typically for a 5X. So if it costs you $100 to build it, we have to be able to sell it for $500. If you plan on selling it for $80, we should probably be building it for about $12. And so a lot of people find that shocking, but that's the mechanics that are required to make a business functional. So the people who I think have the most ideal business are the people that are in the kind of in the air business that sell cell phone time, like AT&T and Verizon. If you go look at their budgets, 80% of their budgets are marketing budgets and 15% are operations. Because they're selling air. They're not selling anything. They just have some hardware, and it's not really complex hardware anymore. So those margins are good. And then so we have innovation, audience, margin, and then the last piece is story. And that's what I provide for our clients and for these products, is the connective dialogue that brings the consumer to a place where they feel like they're aware of the problem that we're going to solve for them in a manner that they feel like they're discovering the problem and they're discovering the solution. Because people are always more willing to sign up and purchase a solution that they feel like they've discovered, as opposed to a solution that's been jammed down their throat. So hopefully we are story experts. And I think no matter what business you get into, sooner or later you find that's the business you end up in. You're always in the marketing and storytelling business for your product. No matter what you think you're in, that's where you end up.
Still saying whatever business you're in, you're always in marketing.
Absolutely true.
What's your philosophy with storytelling? Is there any ongoing theme or kind of general storyline you kind of stick to?
I don't know if there's a general one. I would say, first of all, you want to be interested. If you're interested in something, you become interesting. If you try to be interesting, you're not. You become boring very fast. So when I direct actors, I'll direct people to never talk like you're speaking to 1 million people. Like right now, I'm not talking like I'm speaking to 1 million people. I'm talking like I'm talking to you. That's more interesting than if you go, oh, there's 1 million people watching. There's not, because that's not how people consume media. They consume it one at a time, on their computer, on their phone, in their living room, in their underwear. That's the way that's the way, content's received. So I think telling stories that are about the audience, about themselves, is probably the safest bet. So the stories sound familiar to them, but they're about them. I'm never telling a story about the product. I'm always telling a story about the viewer.
That's cool. That's very cool.
Anybody can do it.
How's your journey changed? Because you said you've now partners in companies and stuff. Was that a conscious decision to, after the stuff early successes you had, but weren't involved with the back end of it, or how did that all come about?
Well, I think that there's, I think it's come about where there's always need. So there's always clients and companies that have a need to have stories told about their products and had advertising created for them. And if it's a good product, I feel kind of morally obligated and ethically obligated to help them, particularly because it's helping the audience. It's not really just helping the company. I'm trying to bring good things to the world. And time is finite. I only have so much time. And so I have time to be involved in, I guess, products that I'm passionate about that I'll own, or I'll participate in ownership fashion. And that's probably 3 or 4 or 5 at a time. And then on this client side, there's probably 3 or 4 or 5 at a time that I deal with on the client side. And when I was exclusively an agency owner, I probably had 10 clients at a time. So it's actually a very similar ratio. It's just half of the clients I have now are me. And they stay on until we sell a company,
Yeah.
So it's a very similar model. It's and I don't really distinguish one group from another all that much. It's not like I try more hard one day than I do the next day. I like to win, so I'm always in it to win it for whether it's our own products or our clients.
What's winning?
I think winning is actually making that communication happen in a salient way, where an audience is rallied and gets together, and an audience starts to purchase the product, and you see growth in the company. So, and I think that if we do it strategically and intelligently, I can walk away from it. Like 6 months or a year later, or 2 years later, I don't have to have any involvement in the business. Like I don't have any involvement with GoPro anymore. They're friends of mine, but I haven't worked on the business in 6 years. But it hasn't substantially changed. They're still utilizing the exact same marketing messages, principles, and everything that we started with because we did it correctly. And it's kind of like, okay, it's got its own momentum in its own life, and it becomes readily apparent to the people who come in to work after you and go, oh, this is what we do. Because there's kind of a machine built. So I think to me it's not about dollars, it's about success. And to me, success is about these objectives and growth.
When you say there's machine built, can you clarify that a bit more? Is that just it's so ingrained into the culture of how the marketing team that's now there, or what does that mean exactly?
Well, for me, when I start a project, I do a creative brief, and most agencies, I think, do about a 2-page creative brief. We typically do 30-page briefs. So at the end of our brief, it is very clear that you have 5 audience segments and who they are. You have a very clear sales argument for the product if you had unlimited time with all of your audiences. And you have that segmented out so that certain elements of that sales argument are applied to each one of those customer verticals and are consistent. And those things don't really change. For instance, let's take GoPro, for example. There's a group of people that buy GoPros because they want to put footage of themselves surfing, skiing, snowboarding, motorcycle riding on Facebook and on YouTube and in other vanity plays where they want to see themselves doing a sport and not have to talk about what a badass they are. Well, you can chop that up in the sub-verticals of those different sports, but that's really a type of customer, and it's typically male. That customer is 15 to 30 years old, maybe 40. Okay. So that's one way that you message to that group of people. Well, there's a whole nother vertical in the product that's senior citizens that are shooting footage of their grandkids on ATVs and taking them out hunting and fishing. And that's a different expression. That's not so much vanity. That's an outward play towards the empathy and the connection between, the experiential, and wanting to validate that relationship of, wasn't I an awesome grandparent? And I love my grandkid too. So there is some ego in it, but it's slightly different. And then there's people who say have a newborn and they want to document the growth of their kid and the baseball games and the this, that, and the other thing. And it's really a secondary tool. It's not a tool of vanity as much as it's a tool of capturing those moments with that kid. So, and then there's a whole nother vertical that's pets. Like there are people that are cat crazy and dog crazy that have GoPro libraries. Like I have a very good friend of mine, and he takes tons of GoPro footage and posts it on Facebook all the time of his dog. I've never seen a picture of this guy himself on his own Facebook page, but he has hours of movies of his pets online. And that's yet another type of person. So when you split up all those verticals, you're really talking to people differently, but the overarching brand structure is the same. So if you set that up correctly in your brief, and your margins are in your brief, and your media plan is in your brief, and your idea of, we're going to run a contest to give GoPro cameras away that's going to bring us leads to ultimately sell cameras to, that's in your brief. You have all of these elemental things that are foundational to the business that are in place. It's like 5 spinning plates. And you can walk away and go, hey, make sure you keep the plates spinning. Instead of you being the person that started them all 5 spinning, now they have 5 departments that each spin a plate. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It's a really detailed approach. I don't think many people go into that depth. Like you say, much of your 2 pages was your 30 pages. What I'm thinking of next here is, where do you learn this precision in marketing and getting in depth and applying it to a new world? Because I know you've got a lot of incredible friends in marketing, but along this journey, how did you start?
So this would revealed itself to me. I was at an agency that did no briefs whatsoever. They just brought people in the door and sat them down and asked them what their product was and said, great, we'll take the contract. And they talked them into doing commercials, and they went out and mid-shot commercials. And I felt that was very disorganized. And I wanted us to take less risk as an agency. I wanted more, I'm going to say, stable corporate type clients, more J&Js of the world, more SC Johnsons. I wanted more Windex and less Blistex. And so I just went and looked up how agencies were doing creative briefs. And I was seeing online all of these 2-page briefs, and I was like, well, these are shit. Like, I wouldn't even know what to do with 2 pages. Like, that's not enough information. And so I just sat down and went, okay, what are the parts and pieces that I need? And I started writing those down. I need a USP. I need the problem. I need the solution. I need the sales argument. I need the verticals. I need the margins. I need to know the distribution channels. And it's really kind of a business plan more than just a creative brief. And so I developed this process of doing these, and it started becoming a fantastic sales tool. Because now I would go into a sales meeting, and there's probably 5 agencies bidding on an RFP for some client, and they go in and they ask 2 or 3 questions about what's the product. And of course, the manufacturer of the product, no matter who it is, shoves the product in the middle of the table and starts talking about the features, not even the benefits. But when I would go in, I would now have questions. What's the problem that it solves? How is it the solution? What's the USP? And they go, what the hell's a USP? Oh, great. This is what it. So I'd start to teach a course in the process of asking them all of the questions. And by the time I got done with the sales presentation, it was just me asking them a ton of questions. They'd be afraid to hire anybody else because nobody else asked those questions. And they go, this guy obviously knows what he's doing. None of those other people did. And it became a sales technique that turned into a very effective tool for producing the content later. Because most people just rush. They just rush to get into business, or rush to get the contract, or rush to close the deal. And they don't stop and think and ask the questions. And that's all I did, was I just slowed down and said, okay, what is this really about? Who are we really selling it to? Why do they really want it? And just by asking those questions, you get to this briefing process. So that's where it came from. I didn't learn it in a school. I don't think anybody teaches it. I mean, I'm currently writing my second book about it, but I don't think that I get asked to teach it, and I do sometimes, like at St. Ed's, or I'll go to a variety of colleges around the country, or go to seminars, and I can spend either an hour, or I can spend 4 days teaching people this process, and I get asked to do that a lot, but I don't know anybody else that teaches it. But
not the same way, and not on the same sort of level. A lot of direct response guys will go deep into the customer's psychometric demographics, but I haven't seen it done with distribution channels and everything as well, which I think is pretty important.
I think it's essential. Like, I wouldn't know how to do a business without it, but the great thing is once you do the work, you can hand it to anybody in the organization, and they know exactly what business you're in. They know exactly how to talk to your customers. They know exactly where the profitability is. Like, they know everything that you need to know about a business. You can communicate to your staff, to your customer. Like, it's a map for the whole thing. It's the cheat code.
Here's what I find interesting about you. You seem very left brain, right brain. You seem to function, you're extremely competent both. On your online persona, you seem to be very, I don't want to say spiritual, but very connected with people. And
I think that those are all fair comments. That's not the first time I've heard.
You seem to be more numbers driven and very metrics as well.
Yeah, it's partly. I think it's partially because I grew up trained as a retail grocer, so I understand P&Ls intimately, and I can look at a P&L and I can see the behavior of the company, like the people. But I also am a screenwriter and can envision dialogue and how scenes play out. And I think that anybody can actually develop that. I think that people just become reticent to, that they kind of get into something that they're kind of good at, and they think that the other part is out of bounds. And I've never considered myself a person who lacked ability or opportunity. Like, if you tell me this can be done, I don't understand that I'm not the one that can do it. So I've taught myself how to cliff ski. I've taught myself how to play the guitar. I've taught myself how to race cars. And I've gone and taken lessons for some of those things at the same time. But I think that there's an awful lot of things in the world to enjoy and to involve yourself in. Why would you limit yourself? Painters can be good at math. Leonardo da Vinci was my hero. So if that helps. Yeah.
So did you develop that a long time, or were you more stronger at one aspect initially?
I think I was naturally probably more artistic and creative, and was forced to learn the numbers. Although I was good at physics in school, I never took a calculus class, and I took math analysis in order to avoid taking calculus. But math analysis is puzzling. It's, here's a string of numbers, now come up with the equation as to how that happened.
So pattern recognition.
Yeah.
That's what
yeah. And so those things have always appealed to me, but I was really force-fed in the grocery business how to break down numbers and things. And then I started doing things inside the four walls of a grocery store and the business as an operator that were creative, that the people who were in the business weren't doing. And so they took notice of that really quickly. And they were mathematical things where I figured out a lot of different types of math and connected them to the behavioral patterns of the customers. And so created pattern interrupts within the store that forced profitability.
Huh. So you do a lot of stuff in the store to actually help the profitability as on a macro level before you started doing the advertising. Like I said, really there's your experimental phase.
Yes, and I don't want to go into them because there's like 50 things you can do inside a retail store within 2 weeks. If you know your numbers, there's about 50 things you can do in a retail store to increase your gross profitability 5 to 10 points, which doesn't sound like a lot, but in a retail store, that's your profitability. You can go from being broke to being a millionaire on $10 or $15 million a year in volume.
That's a lesson in itself. Heading back towards GoPro.
Incremental success is valuable in every business.
Heading back towards GoPro stories, I think that's what people know. Tell us a little bit about how it started and what kind of roadblocks you guys encountered. Was it all success, or were there?
Yeah, no, it was a pretty easy. It was one of those things that sometimes when it works, it just works. I was introduced to GoPro by in our agency, we had a guy who did new products. He kind of went out and looked for new products and new ideas, and he said, "Hey, you need to go to the show with me." We went to the Outdoors Adventure show, I think. It was in Salt Lake City, and it's a place where people sell kayaks and canoes and Range Rovers and ski equipment. And Nick Woodman had this booth with GoPro, and the booth was a white van that he drove from California, and it was full of his skis and his surfboard and all of his sporting shit. And he'd pull this stuff out and some TVs and roll out a piece of carpeting and have a sign, and that was his booth. It was just everything that fit in his van, and then he'd sleep in the van. And the cameras weren't that great at the time, and they were kind of a pinhole camera. They still had analog batteries in them. In fact, I was going to see if I had one within reach. I don't. I have a number of Hero 3s within reach, but I don't have any of the older ones within reach. But anyways, the camera was not that great, but the mounts were fantastic. And so we started talking. I said, this would be a really good product for an infomercial. He goes, God, I'd love to do that. Let me talk to my dad. His dad was one of his funding partners. His dad ran a VC group. And so Nick and his dad and his friend Paul came up to Seattle and sat in our office with my partners and I, and we talked about how to do an infomercial, and we went out to dinner, and I said, okay, well, I'm going to start on a creative brief. So I wrote him a creative brief, and in that we came up with a plan of all these verticals and the margin and the idea of having a contest. And we were on board to do a half-hour show, and I went home one day and I wrote a half-hour show, I think in 2 days. I literally sat in bed and just typed for 2 days. And I, via the internet, sent him the show, and he called me and he goes, hey, we're not doing this. I said, what are you talking about? He goes, I don't want to do a half hour. I want to do 60-second spots. I said, okay. So take the half-hour show. It's 30 pages long. Distribute it across your floor. Pick up any page you like. That's a spot, because I had 30 different scenes in it that were either skiing or surfing or whatever. So it was actually already done. So we picked, I think, 10 or 12 different sports, used user-generated footage. I've actually never shot a GoPro commercial in my life. It's all been user-generated footage until we were able to afford the likes of Shaun White and professional athletes. And picked 12 different networks that matched those verticals, not unlike you do on the internet now. This is about 2007 or 8 at this point. And probably 2009. And picked those verticals and put car racing on the Speed Network and skiing on the Ski Channel and babies on the Lifetime Network and hunting and fishing on the Hunting and Fishing Channel and kayaks on Outside TV. And every single commercial started the same. It said, be a hero. It showed a graphic. And then it went on to show the before of the person, the footage of them with their helmet and stuff before they turn the camera around. And then 26 seconds of them skiing or surfing or doing whatever they did. And at the end, there was a 3-second call to action that said, every day we give away a complete suite of our products. Go online to enter. People would go to the website. Interrupt would pop up. They'd enter their email address. It'd go away. And then they would see all the sports and all of the things that you could do with the GoPro. And rationality kicked in, and they went, well, there's no way in hell I'm ever going to win this because everybody's going to enter. And they'd buy. And so we went from 0 to $16 million, or $600,000 to $16 million in the first year on TV. And then the next year we went from 16 to 65. We went from 65 to doing Super Bowl commercials and 600 million, and then they IPO'd, and kind of the rest is history.
It's an incredible story.
Yeah, it was pretty fun. And I mean, it's one of those things that glad I went to the trade show.
Yes, you'd meet some pretty incredible people overall as well, especially with the entrepreneurial sides.
It has been very weird. There's almost not a famous person in the world that I haven't met personally. which is really weird to say. And it's super weird when I have dinner and conversations with somebody and they bring up somebody and they're like, oh, David Beckham. And I'm like, oh yeah, he's really nice. And you feel like kind of a jerk because like you have actually had interactions with all of these people because pretty soon everybody's connected to a brand. Like you've met everybody but you've also met all of the owners and creators and the VC people and all of the people that are behind things. So there's not many people I haven't at least had the opportunity to, kind of be in their rare air, which is kind of neat.
Who are the people that inspire you?
People that are nice to other people, even though they don't have to be. When I see people that have power and money treat waiters and waitresses nicely, I'm inspired. When I see people that I know have power and wealth give money or help to people and never take any credit for it, I'm incredibly inspired. And I'm also cynical in that when I see people with mediocre money and wealth do good in the world and make sure that everybody knows it, it's kind of depressing. So I think being gracious to people when nobody knows it and it's not required shows a lot of integrity. And being kind to your family and your friends and people who have lifelong friendships. Like most of my friends I've known since I was 6 or 7 years old. The people in my company I've been working with for 25 years. Those kind of people that have that kind of longevity, I aspire to have that longevity. So I work hard in my life to maintain those relationships. So I'm not impressed by a Bentley or a jet or a mansion or like that happens, and people that show that stuff off usually end up crashing and burning in some form or fashion.
It's too ego-driven unless you really like the cars.
There's nothing wrong with having a wonderful house or living in a castle or having a Bentley. When it becomes your identity is when it's problematic. If it's not your identity, then yeah, I'm totally cool with that. And I know plenty of people that, that are that way, but I also know one of the first brushes I had with someone who's really famous and rich was my wife and I she was pregnant with our second kid, and we went out for fish and chips because she had a craving. And we lived in Tacoma, Washington, and we drove to Seattle. We went to this restaurant on Lake Washington that was kind of famous for their fish and chips. And it was a Sunday afternoon. We drove in and it was closed. And I went and knocked on the glass, and a server came to the door and opened the door about that far and said, hey, we're closed today. We're having a special event. I'm like, there's no cars in the lot. There's nobody here. I'm like, we have one kid that's 1 and my wife's pregnant not to hear. It's like a Jesus, Mary, and Joseph story. I'm like, my wife's pregnant. We just drove an hour for these fish and chips. The guy goes, I'll be right back. He comes back to the door and he goes, you can come in and eat. We walk into the restaurant and they seat us. And this is a restaurant that holds 200 people. They seat us one table away from Bill and Melinda Gates. And Bill and Melinda Gates this is before they had kids. They have a pile of books and magazines on the table, and they're just sitting there reading, and they're not even talking to each other. And we just kind of wave at them, and they waved at us. And so we ordered our fish and chips and did our deal. And they got up to leave, and I'm kind of a car person, and I know that he's a Porsche guy. So I'm like, I got to see what he's driving, honey. She's like, I don't care. So they go and they get into their car and drive off. And it was a blue 1989 Honda Accord. And I thought, all right, he gets it. Like, here's this guy who was he was on his way to being one of the top 10 richest people on the planet at the moment. And he was driving an absolutely innocuous vehicle through the city that he lived in so that no one would notice him, just kind of blending in. And I thought, that's pretty cool.
I love what they're doing with their foundation.
Yeah, they're quite remarkable people living an extraordinary existence, and I think that they are raising their kids to be quite decent human beings as well. So I know that there's a lot of stories about him that aren't great, but that wasn't my experience.
My understanding from what I've pieced together is in the build-up he had to be a certain person, but when meeting Melinda and having the kids, he was able to shift that energy and focus that same entrepreneurial energy and that same fervor to how he'd approach charity and how he'd actually solve problems?
I think that that's probably endemic to a lot of men. That when they meet their wives, they become, and they have children. Like, it's easy to be an atheist until you have a baby.
That's an interesting.
You look into a child's eyes and you see the infinity going that direction. And you raise a child and you learn more from your children than you ever did from your parents. And so much more of your character is revealed. I think that if you live long enough, you realize how absolutely small and ignorant you are. You think you know a lot when you're 20, and when you're 50 or 60, you know you don't know anything.
That's a pretty incredible statement. Ron,
I think it's pretty true.
If you were to pass on soon, what would you want people to say about you at your funeral?
Finally, he picked up a bill. Drinks for everyone. I don't know. I'm not going to be there. I don't care what they say. And I mean, there's that's, I don't think it's, I hope there'll be someone that said he really was funny. He made me laugh a lot. He's a nice guy to be around. You always looked forward to seeing him, but you didn't fear seeing him.
Love it. That's perfect. Guys, if people want to learn more about you, Ron, where can they go? What can they, if someone here in my audience is saying, I need to work with this guy, what can they do to get that process started? Sure.
You can just reach out to us through the agency, Big Baby Agency. So, and you can email me, or you can. We have a person that fields questions at genius@Big Baby Agency, or you can email me personally, Ron@Big Baby Agency. Those are different people, thankfully. If you are interested in the creative brief process, I did write a book back in 2011 that outlines a lot of that, called Buy Now. And I think I don't get any money for that book, by the way. It's you can listen to the audiobook cheaply, I think, on Amazon for like $10, and I think the book costs about $20. But it'll map out how to do a creative brief, and that's. When I finish my new book, The Marketing Mercenary, I'll get the information to you so you can get that to your folks as well.
Definitely. When's that planned to come out?
I wrote it 2 years ago, and now I just have to write all the salt and pepper around it. So it's just been sitting here in between projects. I haven't got it done. So I should be able to get to it in the next 2-3 months and get it out this year as part of my 2019 to-do list. So it's pretty high up there on the priorities.
All right, guys. I had a blast today. Check out Ron's book. Check out his agency, and hope everyone has an awesome day, and we'll speak to you all very soon.